Since the early 2000s, Disney has been trying everything in their power to recapture the magic of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. With numerous failed attempts at a new franchise, they accidentally created a new subgenre of films in the process. A subgenre I like to call the failed next big thing. With all the films I've covered in this series so far, all of them have been failures both at the box office and critically. For example, look at John Carter and The Lone Ranger, which are both ranked as some of the biggest box office bombs of all time. But with the topic of today's video, 2010's Tron Legacy, the story is different. Tron Legacy did pretty well at the box office, as it grossed $400 million against a $170 million budget. Even though this film did well commercially, it still failed to relaunch Tron as the next big movie franchise, in the likes of other Disney properties like Pirates of the Caribbean or the MCU. Tron never reached the heights that Disney wanted it to, and the planned sequel has been in production hell ever since, with it potentially coming out next year, nearly 15 years after the fact. So today, let's take a look at Tron Legacy, and try to understand why it never started the film franchise it was supposed to, and why it never reached the potential it could have had. The story of Tron Legacy starts all the way back in the 1980s. In 1982, Steven Leisberger wrote and directed the film Tron for Walt Disney Productions. Although at its release Tron was a box office failure, it gained a cult following in the years after its release, largely due to its special effects, which were revolutionary at the time. Tron was one of the earliest films to use extensive CGI. Fun fact, it was actually disqualified from the Best Visual Effects category at the Oscars because the Academy said that using computer graphics was cheating. Oh, how the times have changed. In 1999, there were rumors that Pixar Animation were looking to either remake the film or create a sequel to the film. This was very fitting for Pixar Animation, as the head of animation at Pixar, John Lasseter, stated that Tron was the film that gave them the confidence to create Toy Story, as he saw the potential in computer-generated animation. At this time, Pixar Animation was not fully owned by Disney, who bought the company later in 2006. So if Pixar was to make a Tron sequel, it would have had to been led by Disney. This Pixar Tron ultimately never happened, but talks of a Tron sequel were sparked up once again in 2003 after the success of the video game Tron 2.0. Work on the sequel officially begun in 2005, when Disney hired Brian Klugman and Lee Sternthal to write the script. In 2007, Joseph Kosinski was brought on to direct, who made his feature film debut with this film. He would later go on to direct Top Gun Maverick as well. Jeff Bridges was brought on to reprise his role from the original film, and Garrett Hedlund was cast to play the lead, Sam Flynn. Originally, Bruce Boxleitner's character from the original film, Tron/Alan Bradley, wasn't in the script, but after public outcry from the fans, he was added into the film. All this work on the film was largely spearheaded by producer Sean Bailey, who was a huge Tron fan and had faith in the project. Bailey approached screenwriting duo Adam Horowitz and Edward Kitsis to also work on the screenplay, who were big Tron fans as well. This duo were mostly known for TV at the time, as they worked on my favorite show of all time, Lost. At the 2008 San Diego Comic-Con, a preliminary teaser trailer directed by Kosinski was shown to gauge excitement from the fans and build hype. Although it didn't confirm a film was in production, it did let people know that they were serious about a sequel. With excitement building, the sequel finally went in production in April of 2009. The film was shot in Vancouver, Canada, with the real-life locations being shot in downtown Vancouver. However, the majority of the film was shot in the Canadian Motion Picture Park Studio in Burnaby. Over 12 sets were personally devised and constructed by director Joseph Kosinski, who is actually a graduate from the Columbia University's Architecture School. This film was really cashing in on the 3D craze that 2009's Avatar sparked, as all the scenes that took place in the grid were shot in 3D. Principal photography lasted 67 days, with some minor reshoots happening that touched up the beginning of the film. The film then went into post-production, which lasted 68 weeks due to the heavy special effects needed for the film. The film shoot didn't run into any major problems, aside from the light-up suits that you see the characters wear throughout the film. According to IMDb, every single suit was fitted with a small lithium battery that powered the circuitry for the embedded light strips, but each battery only lasted 12 minutes. In order to maximize the output, the light strips had to be switched on right before each take and turned off immediately afterwards. The circuitries inside the suits were also very fragile, so the actors could not simply sit between takes but had to recline against upright boards. In fact, the wardrobe budget alone was $13 million, as each of those suits worn by the racers allegedly cost $60,000. Daft Punk composed the score for the film, which includes over 30 tracks. They were the obvious pick for the job, as they were both lifelong fans of the original film. They released one single from the soundtrack, Derezzed, and the soundtrack album went on to peak at number 6 on the Billboard 200, as well as going platinum, which meant they sold over 1 million copies. Tron Legacy was released in theaters on December 17, 2010, in the United States and the United Kingdom. The film was originally set to be released in the UK on December 26th, but it was brought forward due to the high demand from the fans. In its opening weekend, it debuted at number 1 in the box office, grossing $44 million. In its theatrical run in the United States, it made $172 million, and overseas it made $228 million, for a total worldwide gross of $400 million. The reviews for the film were pretty mixed. It currently holds a 51% critic and a 63% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 3.2 on Letterboxd. The general consensus is that the visuals are great, but the story and the characters are pretty lackluster. That's the background on the film's production. As you can see, it made a sizable amount of money and decent reviews. So why am I still calling it a failed next big thing? Well, let's discuss. Out of all the films I've covered in the series so far, this is the first one that didn't bomb at the box office. The budget of this film was $170 million, and it made $400 million at the box office. A general rule of thumb in the industry is that a film needs to at least double its budget at the box office in order to break even, because that original budget figure doesn't account for marketing, the theater's cuts, taxes, residuals, etc. So this film probably broke even in regards to the budget and the box office. It did solid numbers, but not great numbers. It didn't make the top 10 films of that year, and it wasn't even in the top 3 Disney movies of that year. But at least it did better than The Sorcerer's Apprentice. But Disney's goal for this property was to launch a new franchise, since this was supposed to be their new tentpole film. And whether it accomplished this is up for debate. On one hand, it failed to create a new film franchise in the likes of Pirates of the Caribbean, but on the other hand, it did launch a lot of projects in other media. This film led to Tron Uprising, an animated television series that ran on Disney XD for one season in 2012, which actually starred Elijah Wood. There's also a tie-in video game for the film titled Tron Evolution, which was released around the same time as the film's release. Additionally, the film spawned a Disneyland ride at Shanghai Disneyland, and later Disney World, titled Tron Light Cycle Power Run. So Tron Legacy created all this additional media, but it didn't have a proper feature film sequel, which leads us to a sore subject for many Tron fans, Tron Ares. Before Tron Legacy was even released, a third film was already being planned, with Adam Horowitz and Edward Kitsis penning the script again. In March of 2015, the sequel officially got the green light from Disney, with Hedlund reprising his role and Kosinski set to direct once again. Principal photography was expected to start in Vancouver later that year in October. However, filming never took place, because just months after the film received the green light, Disney announced they decided to cancel the project. What made Disney suddenly change their minds in a matter of months? Well, it was actually caused by another movie we already covered in this series, Tomorrowland. In May of 2015, Disney's Tomorrowland debuted in theaters, absolutely crashing and burning upon arrival. It made $209 million against a $190 million budget, joining the ranks as one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. This film was also following other Disney bombs that came out in the years leading up to it, such as 2013's The Lone Ranger, 2012's John Carter, and 2010's The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It seemed like Tomorrowland was just the last straw, because after its failure, Disney got cold feet and canceled all the projects that they were uncertain about, such as the third Tron movie. It seemed like the House of Mouse wasn't ready to gamble on a sequel to a film that didn't do the greatest numbers compared to their other tried and true properties, because post-2015, we can see Disney dumped more time and attention into the MCU, Star Wars, and their live-action remakes of their classic animated films. But all hope wasn't lost for Tron Ares, as in an interview with Joseph Kosinski in 2017, he stated that the film wasn't cancelled, but rather cryogenically frozen. And yes, those are his actual words. In fact, a few days after this Q&A, the main actor for this film was unofficially announced. Hopefully they didn't pick an alleged cult leader who has multiple allegations of predatory behavior against underage girls.
Oh no! Oh no!
Jared Leto is the bane of my existence. My favorite Jared Leto movies are the ones where he gets brutally murdered. I hate Jared Leto. Anyways, back to Tron. In 2020, Walt Disney Studios President of Music and Soundtracks, Mitchell Lieb, confirmed in an interview that a third Tron film was being worked on at Disney. He stated the script was done and they were actively looking for a director, as Kosinski was no longer attached to the project. A few months later, Garth Davis was officially announced to be helming the project with a new script written by Jesse Wigetow. However, 3 years later, in 2023, Davis had left the project and Joachim Roning picked up the reins. Filming took place in early 2024, and Tron Ares is currently in post-production. As of right now, the film is slated to release on October 10th of 2025. I am almost certain this film is going to be bad and fail at the box office. It was in production hell for 15 years. It's directed by the guy who made Dead Man Tell No Tales, and it stars a creep. However, the most important aspect of all is that there's no Daft Punk soundtrack. But who knows, maybe the film will be good and be a success, and you guys can come back to this video and tell me how wrong I was. However, I have my doubts. Before we wrap up the video, I want to give my personal thoughts on Tron Legacy. It was alright. Not bad in any way, but not great in any way. Just a middle-of-the-road passable blockbuster. I was really digging the beginning of this movie, as the setup for Sam's character and the background of his relationship with his dad was done very effectively. The movie knows the stuff on Earth is the boring stuff, so it doesn't try to overstay its welcome, and gets right into the computer world as fast as possible. I'm complimenting this aspect of the movie because that was one of my biggest problems with John Carter, as all the stuff on Earth in that film was boring and the setup was done poorly. And once we get into the computer world, we are instantly thrown into some really great action sequences with the discs and the bikes. This is a direct homage to the original Tron, because the movie basically follows the same narrative blueprint for this whole part of the script, where our main character is forced to compete in these games, but then he finds a way to escape and then go on the run from the bad guys. But after the first act, this movie really dips in quality. Once Sam and his dad are reunited, the film devolves into a by-the-numbers action adventure, where you can predict every single plot beat and twist from a mile away. It's even all tied together with a third act skybeam. The characters are okay, but the film doesn't go the extra mile to really make you care for them. Sam's relationship with his dad is the crux of the emotional climax of the film, but aside from a few scenes together, they never really explore their relationship as much as I hoped they would. I also have a small problem with the main villain of the film, Clue. I love the idea and the concept of the character, I just didn't like the execution. Clue is basically an evil clone of Jeff Bridges' character, Kevin Flynn, but he has remained the same age as Kevin was when he first entered the grid. So the filmmakers decided to go the route of de-aging to achieve this. I am not a fan of de-aging technology at all, and this is just yet another film that supports my stance, because de-aged Jeff Bridges lands right in the middle of Uncanny Valley. He looks like a character from the Polar Express, and it totally took me out of the film, especially since the rest of the visual effects were so strong. But that does lead into what I liked about the film, because I have to admit that this film is beautiful to look at. The visual effects really work for the vibe this movie is going for, and it results in some cool world building and fun action sequences. You have to respect the film for really going for it and committing to the fully digital world, just as the first Tron did. But just like the first Tron, this means the visuals take importance over the plot and characters. The score for this movie was also amazing, as Daft Punk knocked it out of the park and understood the assignment. They even got a cameo in the film, which was cool to see. I also really like the David Bowie inspired character. They were fun for the short amount of screen time that they had. But aside from the first act, the visuals, and the score, I didn't really like much in this movie. No shame if you love this movie, there's a lot to like, but it just personally wasn't my taste. I do think that it deserves a proper sequel, and not one that stars Jared Leto. I hate Jared Leto. Tron Legacy was so close to becoming Disney's next big thing, but it unfortunately didn't make quite enough money for the company to fully commit. That, partnered with the other big flops they had at the same time, resulted in this film being forgotten to the general audience. With a Doom sequel on the way, all I can think about is the wasted potential that this film franchise had. So that's the story of Tron Legacy, Disney's failed next big thing. What are your thoughts on the film? Would you consider it a success, a failure, or somewhere in between? Do you hate Jared Leto as much as I do? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you like this video, make sure to check out the others in the series, and maybe, even subscribe. This has been Tom from Eisenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.